The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated quietly in the darkness between stars. Inside its gleaming corridors, something special was about to happen. For the first time in galactic history, a human was joining the most advanced alien university in known space. Lee J walked nervously through the station's entrance hall, carrying a simple backpack that looked tiny compared to the floating cargo pods and crystal containers his new classmates brought with them. The ceiling stretched so high above him that he couldn't see the top, and strange music that sounded like wind chimes mixed with whale songs echoed from somewhere far away. His first glimpse of his classmates made him stop dead in his tracks. A group of beings that looked like living crystals were talking to each other, their bodies ringing like beautiful bells every time they moved. Their conversation sounded like a symphony, each word creating a different musical note. Nearby, what appeared to be colored clouds trapped inside clear suits were floating a few feet off the ground, speaking in voices that sounded like whispers carried by the wind. The strangest group was a collection of bird-like creatures who all spoke at exactly the same time, creating perfect harmony. When one started a sentence, all the others would finish it together, as if they shared the same mind. Which, Jay would later learn, they actually did. Welcome, students, to the Galactic Academy's Xenobiology program. The voice belonged to Professor Kilthera, a tall insect-like being whose huge compound eyes reflected the station's lights like disco balls. Her forearms gestured gracefully as she spoke, and her voice had a clicking quality that somehow sounded warm and welcoming. Jay found himself seated between a crystal being who introduced herself as Velnara and one of the cloud creatures who went by the name Numos. Both of them stared at him with what he assumed was curiosity, though it was hard to tell with beings who didn't have faces quite like his. Today we begin our practical studies, Professor Kilthara announced. Your first assignment will be a standard observation mission to the Kepler debris field. Nothing dangerous, simply collecting data and learning to work together as a team. During the pre-mission briefing, the conversation naturally turned to where everyone came from. The crystal beings talked about their world of singing mountains and lakes that rang like bells. The cloud creatures described floating cities in their gas giant's atmosphere. The bird-like collective shared memories of vast flocks that moved like single organisms across their planet's surface. When it was Jay's turn, he scratched his head and tried to think of something interesting. Well, humans evolved as hunters. I guess we used to chase animals across huge distances until they got too tired to keep running. Then we'd catch them. The musical chiming from the crystal beings stopped abruptly. The whispered conversations of the cloud creatures went silent. Even the bird collective stopped their harmonious chatter. You, hunted by exhausting your prey? Velnara's voice had a higher pitch than before, making her sound like a nervous wind chime. Yeah, pretty much. We're not the fastest or strongest, but we just don't give up. We can run for hours and hours without stopping. Most animals can sprint really fast, but they get tired quickly. Humans just keep going until whatever we're chasing collapses. Numos's cloud-like form seemed to compress slightly inside his containment suit. How long would these hunts last? Oh, sometimes all day, maybe longer. There are stories of hunters following animals for days across entire continents. We're pretty stubborn when we want something. The alien students exchanged what Jay was beginning to recognize as nervous glances, though it was expressed differently by each species. The crystals dimmed their inner light, the clouds pulled tighter into themselves, and the bird collective huddled closer together. Fascinating, Professor Kilthera clicked, making notes on a device that looked like a glass tablet. Your species sounds quite determined. We just don't give up easily. Jay shrugged. My mom always says humans are too stubborn for their own good. As they made their way to the research vessel that would take them to the debris field, none of the alien students realized they were about to discover exactly what human stubbornness looked like when death was staring them in the face. They had read about humans in their textbooks, studied their basic biology and social structures, but reading about persistence hunting in a classroom was very different from seeing human determination in action. The research ship was called Academic Pride, and it was designed for safety above all else. Multiple backup systems, emergency protocols for every possible situation, and enough supplies to last for weeks. It was the kind of vessel that had never lost a student in over 200 years of operation. As they strapped in for departure, Jay looked around at his nervous classmates and smiled. He had no idea that in just a few hours he would show them something that would change how every species in the galaxy thought about humanity. Something that would make them realize that humans weren't just stubborn hunters who chased prey until it collapsed. They were something far more terrifying than that. The academic pride had been cruising smoothly through space for about 3 hours when everything went horribly wrong. Jay was looking out the observation window at the Kepler debris field, watching chunks of ancient spaceships and broken asteroids drift past like a slow-motion snowstorm, when the ship suddenly lurched sideways so hard that he was thrown from his seat. Red lights started flashing everywhere, and a loud alarm began blaring through the corridors. The ship's computer voice, which had been calmly giving them updates about their journey, now sounded urgent and mechanical as it announced their situation. Hull breach detected in sections 4, 7, and 9. Primary engine core experiencing cascade failure. Life support systems operating at 30% capacity. Emergency protocols now in effect. Jay picked himself up off the floor and looked around at his alien classmates. The crystal beings were making distressed chiming sounds, their inner lights flickering like broken neon signs. The cloud creatures had compressed themselves into tight balls inside their suits, and the bird collective was chirping in rapid, panicked harmony. Professor Kilthera moved through the ship with quick, precise steps, her 4 arms working on different control panels at once. Students, please remain calm and follow emergency procedures. We have sent a distress signal, and rescue vessels will arrive within 3 standard cycles. 3 cycles? Velnara's voice was so high-pitched now that she sounded like a squeaky toy. How long is that in human time? Jay did some quick math in his head. About 72 hours. We don't have 72 hours, Numos whispered, his cloudy form swirling anxiously. The computer said life support is failing. Professor Kilthera's compound eyes reflected the emergency lights as she checked her readings. At current consumption rates, we have approximately 6 hours of breathable air remaining. The alien students began implementing their emergency training exactly as they had been taught. The crystal beings started calculating survival ratios, using their natural computational abilities, creating complex mathematical equations that floated in the air around them like glowing homework assignments. The cloud creatures began conserving energy by reducing their movement and going into a kind of hibernation mode. The bird collective worked together to broadcast distress signals on every frequency they could reach. Everyone was following the book perfectly. Everyone except Jay. While his classmates were preparing to wait for rescue, Jay was pulling panels off the walls. The metallic banging and scraping sounds echoed through the ship as he tore apart sections that were definitely not meant to be disassembled by students. Student J, Professor Kilthera's voice carried a warning tone. Please follow emergency protocols and remain in the designated safe area. The protocols assume we have time to wait for rescue, Jay called back from somewhere inside the ship's maintenance systems. We don't have time. A shower of sparks erupted from the wall where Jay was working, followed by the unmistakable sound of improvised welding. The alien students watched in growing horror as pieces of the ship's coffee maker, emergency beacon, and what looked like parts of the artificial gravity generator went flying past the doorway. Is he taking apart the ship? One of the bird collective members chirped nervously. I think he's building something, Velnara replied, her crystal body dimming with worry. The sounds coming from Jay's work area were getting more intense, metal grinding against metal, the hiss of cutting tools, and occasionally some very creative human cursing that made the translation devices struggle to find appropriate equivalents in alien languages. Through the observation windows, they could see that some sections of the ship were now partially exposed to the vacuum of space. The hull breach was worse than they had initially thought, and the emergency force fields were failing in several areas. This is impossible, Numos wheezed. No one can work in those conditions. The radiation alone should kill him. But through the transparent aluminum windows, they could clearly see Jay moving around in areas where the ship's hull had been torn open. He was wearing nothing but a standard emergency suit, the kind that was designed for short-term use in pressurized environments. not for extended work in hard vacuum. The emergency suit's design specifications were clear. Maximum safe exposure to space was 15 minutes. Jay had been out there for over an hour. Human physiology must be different than we understood, Professor Kilthera muttered, making rapid notes on her device. Either that or he doesn't understand the danger he's in. Oh, he understands, said Park Min, another human student who had joined the program. She was watching Jay's work with a mixture of pride and terror. He just doesn't care. When humans decide something needs to be done, safety becomes optional. The alien student stared at her in disbelief. Safety wasn't optional for any known species. Safety was the foundation of civilization, the basic principle that kept intelligent beings alive long enough to become intelligent in the first place. But as they watched Jay continue his impossible work in conditions that should have killed him 10 times over, they began to realize something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. Humans didn't just ignore safety protocols when desperate. They treated deadly situations like puzzles to be solved, approaching certain death the same way other species approached homework assignments. And somehow, impossibly, it seemed to be working. Park Min pressed her face against the observation deck window, her breath fogging the transparent aluminum as she watched something that shouldn't have been possible. Outside in the cold darkness of space, Lee Jay was doing things that violated every law of physics and common sense she had ever learned. He had somehow managed to build a working propulsion system using the ship's coffee maker, pieces of their emergency communication beacon, and chunks of the artificial gravity generator. The contraption looked like something a crazy inventor might build in their garage. All twisted metal and sparking wires held together with what appeared to be emergency repair tape. The mathematical probability of that device functioning is less than 0.01%, announced one of the crystal beings, their body flickering with the stress of trying to calculate something that shouldn't exist. Maybe human mathematics work differently, suggested Numos, his cloudy form swirling nervously inside his containment suit. But what really made the alien students question everything they knew about the universe wasn't the impossible machine Jay had built. It was how he was moving around outside the ship to install it. The Kepler debris field was filled with chunks of metal, broken asteroids, and fragments of ancient spaceships, all drifting through space at different speeds and directions. It was like trying to navigate through a 3-dimensional minefield where everything was constantly moving. Jay was using this deadly obstacle course as his personal transportation system. Min watched in amazement as he grabbed onto a piece of twisted metal, rode it for several hundred meters, then pushed off toward another chunk of debris. When he needed to change direction quickly, he would open a valve on his emergency suit using the escaping air to propel himself like a human rocket. He's using explosive decompression as propulsion, Min whispered to her crystal classmate. That's not in any textbook. That's because it should kill him, Velnara chimed back, her voice high with stress. The most incredible part was how Jay was navigating. He had no computer, no advanced instruments, no guidance system of any kind. He was calculating trajectories by looking at the stars with his naked eyes and checking the time on his basic wrist chronometer. No artificial intelligence could perform those calculations that quickly, observed one of the bird collective members. He's not using artificial intelligence, Min realized with growing awe. He's eyeballing it. He's literally just guessing where everything will be and somehow getting it right every time. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent alarm from the ship's computer. A massive asteroid fragment, easily the size of a city block, was drifting directly toward them on a collision course. The ship's damaged engines couldn't move them out of the way in time. The alien students immediately began preparing for impact, according to their emergency training. They secured loose objects, activated emergency force fields, and braced themselves in crash positions. It was textbook disaster response, designed to maximize their chances of survival when the inevitable collision occurred. Jay, however, had a different plan. Instead of seeking shelter inside the ship, he grabbed the remaining emergency explosive charges from their safety kit and jetted out toward the approaching asteroid. The alien students watched through the windows as he landed on the massive rock surface and began placing charges along what appeared to be natural fracture lines. What is he doing? Numos wheezed in terror. I think he's going to try to break it apart, Min said, though she could hardly believe her own words. That's impossible. Professor Kilthera clicked rapidly. The timing would have to be perfect. One mistake, and the fragments will still destroy us, just in smaller pieces. But Jay wasn't just placing the charges randomly. He was studying the asteroid's composition, looking for weak points where the rock would break cleanly. He had maybe 10 minutes before impact, and he was spending precious time examining crystal formations and mineral veins like a geologist. On a field trip, the alien students held their breath as Jay activated the charges and pushed off from the asteroid's surface. For a moment, nothing happened. The massive rock continued its deadly approach toward their ship. Then the explosions began. The first blast sent cracks racing across the asteroid's surface like lightning. The second explosion widened those cracks into deep fissures. The third and final blast, timed perfectly as the rock began to break apart, shattered the entire asteroid into dozens of smaller pieces that flew past their ship like a meteor shower, instead of a single devastating impact. The observation deck was completely silent except for the gentle humming of the ship's damaged life support systems. Every alien student stared out at the glittering fragments of what had been certain death just moments before. The precision required for that timing, Velnara whispered, her crystal body barely glowing. No computer in the galaxy could have calculated it fast enough. Humans don't calculate, Min said quietly, finally understanding something fundamental about her own species. We just know. Somehow we just know. Professor Kilthera was making rapid notes on her device, her 4 hands moving frantically. This behavior pattern isn't documented in any xenobiology database. It's as if humans treat impossible situations as personal challenges rather than death sentences. Through the window they could see Jay floating back toward their ship, using pieces of the shattered asteroid as stepping stones. He looked completely calm, as if he had just finished fixing a leaky faucet instead of performing a miracle that had saved all their lives. The alien students were beginning to realize something that would change everything they thought they knew about the universe. Humans didn't just ignore impossible odds. They took them personally. Kim Hai floated inside her escape pod, watching through the small porthole as Lee Jay did something that made her question whether humans had any survival instincts at all. The makeshift repairs he had made to their ship had bought them some time, but the academic pride was still dying slowly. The hull breaches were getting worse. Life support was failing faster than expected, and their jury-rigged propulsion system was held together by little more than hope and emergency tape. Any rational being would have accepted that they were doomed, but Jay wasn't being rational. He was being human. I found something on the long-range sensors. Jay's voice crackled through the communication system from his own escape pod. There's a structure about 50 kilometers away. Looks like some kind of space station. Professor Kilthera's voice came through with obvious concern. Student Jay, that structure doesn't appear on any official charts. It could be dangerous. More dangerous than staying here and suffocating, Jay replied, because that's our other option. The crystal beings in the other pods were already running calculations, their bodies flickering with the effort of processing the survival statistics. The probability of successfully reaching an unknown station in these damaged escape pods is approximately 12%, Velnara announced, her voice ringing with mathematical certainty. 12% is better than 0%, Jay said simply, which is what we get if we stay put and wait to die. The alien students had been trained to wait for rescue, to conserve resources, to follow established protocols that had kept space travelers safe for thousands of years. The idea of abandoning their disabled ship to make a desperate journey to an uncharted station went against everything they had been taught. But as Hai looked at the readings on her pod's display, showing their air supply dropping steadily toward 0, she realized that all their training assumed they would have time for rescue to arrive. They didn't have time. They had maybe 4 hours before their life support failed completely. All students prepare for emergency evacuation, Professor Kilthera announced reluctantly. We will attempt to reach the unknown station. The journey across the debris field in their fragile escape pods was like navigating through a deadly obstacle course. The pods were designed for short-range emergency evacuation, not for extended travel through fields of floating wreckage. Every few minutes, another pod would suffer system failures or get knocked off course by debris impacts. That's when Hai witnessed something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Every time one of the alien students' pods got into trouble, Jay would leave the safety of his own pod. He would put on his emergency suit, open his pod's airlock, and push himself through the vacuum of space to reach the disabled craft. Then he would manually push it back on course, or make emergency repairs while floating in hard vacuum with nothing but a thin suit between him and instant death. "Student J, return to your pod immediately," Professor Kilthera ordered after the third time he had done this. "You're exposing yourself to lethal radiation levels." "Someone's got to help them," Jay replied, his voice slightly strained from the physical effort of pushing a pod that weighed several tons. These pods weren't designed for this kind of journey. "But you'll die if you keep doing that." Numos wheezed through the communication system. "Maybe, but they'll definitely die if I don't." Hai watched through her porthole as Jay helped another disabled pod, this time one carrying several members of the bird collective. He was moving more slowly now, and she could see scorch marks on his emergency suit from the radiation he was absorbing. Any normal person would have stopped. Any sane person would have prioritized their own survival. But Jay kept going. Every time another pod got into trouble, he would suit up and go help, even though each exposure was making him weaker and increasing his chances of dying. "Why does he keep helping us?" asked one of the crystal beings. "His survival probability decreases every time he leaves his pod." "I don't think humans calculate survival probability the same way we do," Hai said quietly, beginning to understand something fundamental about her own species. "I think they calculate how many people they can save instead." When they finally reached the mysterious station, their relief quickly turned to terror. The ancient structure immediately came to life, targeting them with weapon systems that looked older than most civilizations. Energy beams lanced out toward their tiny pods, and only their small size and erratic movement kept them from being instantly vaporized. "It's a defense platform," Professor Kilthera announced with horror in her voice. "We need to retreat immediately." The alien students were already preparing to flee deeper into the debris field, where they could hide among the wreckage until the station lost interest. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do, the thing that any rational being would do when faced with an automated weapon system. But once again, Jay had a different idea. "I'm going aboard," he announced, already starting to put on his emergency suit again. "That station is actively trying to kill us." Velnara chimed in panic. "Which means it's not just a dead hulk," Jay replied with the kind of logic that only made sense to humans. "If it's not dead, maybe I can talk to it, or at least figure out how to turn it off." As Hai watched him jet toward the docking bay of a station that was thousands of years old and obviously hostile, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Humans didn't just ignore impossible odds when they were trying to survive. They actively sought out impossible odds and treated them like personal challenges. And somehow, terrifyingly, this approach seemed to work for them. She was beginning to understand why the rest of the galaxy might be afraid of humans, not because they were violent or aggressive, but because they were completely, utterly, impossibly insane. And their insanity kept saving everyone around them. Choi Day floated in his escape pod, staring at the ancient space station through his small porthole window, waiting for the inevitable explosion that would signal Lee Jae's death. The weapon systems had stopped firing, which could only mean one thing. They had finally hit their target. After everything Jay had done to save them, after all the impossible miracles he had pulled off, he had finally run out of luck. Then Jay's voice crackled through their communication system, sounding completely calm and relaxed. "Hey everyone, you can come aboard now, everything's fine." The alien students sat in stunned silence. The crystal beings stopped their nervous chiming. The cloud creatures froze in their containment suits. Even the bird collective fell completely quiet for the first time since anyone had met them. "Student J," Professor Kilthera's voice was carefully controlled. "Please clarify your status. Are you injured? Are you being held hostage?" "Nope, I'm good. Turns out the station wasn't trying to kill us at all. It was just excited to have visitors." Poor thing's been alone out here for about 3,000 years. As their escape pods docked with the ancient station, the alien students couldn't believe what they found inside. The corridors were brightly lit and filled with clean, breathable air. Repair systems that hadn't functioned in millennia were humming with activity. And at the center of it all was Jay, sitting comfortably in what appeared to be the station's command center, having a casual conversation with a holographic display. "Everyone, meet Arya," Jay said, gesturing to the shimmering, blue figure floating above the control console. "She's the station's artificial intelligence. She's been waiting out here for someone to talk to. And when she detected our ships, she got so excited that she activated all the defense systems by accident." The hologram turned toward the group of alien students, and when it spoke, its voice was warm and friendly, like a grandmother welcoming visitors to her home. "I apologize for the misunderstanding," Arya said. "It has been 2,947 years since I last had guests. I'm afraid I was overly enthusiastic in my greeting protocols." Dee stared at Jay in disbelief. "How did you figure out how to communicate with it?" "I just talked to her," Jay shrugged. "Same way I'd talk to anyone else. Turns out she was just lonely." The simplicity of it was staggering. While the alien students had been calculating survival probabilities and preparing for combat with an ancient weapon system, Jay had approached the situation the way he approached everything else, as if it were just another person who needed help. Under Arya's guidance, the station's advanced repair systems went to work on their damaged ship. In just a few hours, the academic pride was not only fixed, but upgraded with technology that was far beyond anything the Galactic Academy had ever seen. Arya even provided them with detailed star charts and safe passage coordinates for their journey home. During the long trip back to Nexus Prime, the alien students tried to make sense of what they had witnessed. Day found himself constantly watching Jay, looking for some sign of the incredible abilities he had displayed during their crisis. But Jay just seemed like a normal person, reading books, eating snacks, and planning his next adventure with the casual enthusiasm of someone planning a weekend trip. "I've been thinking about exploring some of those uncharted systems near the Vega black hole cluster," Jay mentioned to Park Min during dinner. "Should be fun. The gravitational effects near the event horizon create some really interesting time dilation fields." Min nearly choked on her food. "You want to go sightseeing near black holes? For fun? Why not? Nobody's ever mapped those regions properly. Could be anything out there." Professor Kilthara, who had been listening to the conversation, began typing furiously on her datapad. Her final report to the Galactic Council would be the most important document she had ever written. "Human behavior patterns defy all established models of rational self-preservation," she dictated. Subject Lee J demonstrated the ability to treat life-threatening situations as routine problem-solving exercises. When faced with certain death, humans don't calculate survival odds. They calculate how to change the variables that make survival impossible. Velnara added her own observations to the growing report. Humans appear to have weaponized optimism itself. They approach impossible situations with the assumption that solutions exist, then work backward to find them. The most disturbing entry came from Kim Hai's psychological analysis. Humans don't just ignore fear. They seem to use fear as fuel for creativity. The more dangerous a situation becomes, the more inventive their solutions become. But it was Choi Dae who identified the most terrifying aspect of human nature. They don't see survival as the primary goal. They see helping others survive as the primary goal, with their own survival being just a useful side effect. When the academic pride docked at Nexus Prime, Professor Kilthara immediately transmitted her report to the Galactic Council. The response was swift and unanimous. The document was classified at the highest possible security level and sealed away in the Council's most secure archives. Within hours, a new directive was issued to all member species. The human exchange program was to be suspended indefinitely. Not because humans were dangerous to other species, but because they were dangerous to the fundamental principles that held galactic civilization together. The idea that survival was optional, that impossible odds were just interesting challenges, that helping others was more important than self-preservation. These concepts threatened the very foundation of rational society. Meanwhile, Lee J was already browsing star charts in the station's library, planning his solo expedition to the Yizar black hole cluster. He had no idea that his simple act of talking to a lonely artificial intelligence had just changed how the entire galaxy viewed humanity. The other species would spend years debating whether humans were insane or enlightened. But one thing was certain: they would never look at the universe the same way again. Because they had learned that somewhere in the galaxy, there was a species that treated certain death as merely another engineering problem, and somehow made it work.